It's a pleasure to be here. Obviously, if you know me, you know that I don't have the expertise to discuss what substantive lessons we learned from lab experiments. So rather, I put together some comments about methodology from the perspective of a data-oriented outsider. These are intended to help bridge the gap between experimenters and empirical micro and macroeconomists. Of course, one lesson I learned after the few readings I made is that the Barcelona GSE community has formidable strength in the field, thanks to the work of Jordi, Rosemarie, Ramon, and many others. Now, I have six comments, but I can shorten them if I'm short of time. One is that, of course, experiments are one of the ways we can identify treatment effects. And any evaluation involves a comparison of units who get treatment with units that don't get treatment. And the question is which units best represent the treated units had they not been treated. In some sense, every empirical researcher is reporting the result of an experiment. And Harrison and List put it in this way: every researcher who treats a variable as exogenous effectively views their data as coming from an experiment. In an experimental setting, this belief is built into the design of data collections. In other cases, this belief is based on theory, auxiliary evidence, or both. For example, a conditional exogeneity assumption, as in propensity score matching, asserts that all variables that need to be adjusted for are observed by the researcher. In an instrumental variable setting, we allow for unobserved controls as long as some variables are independent of potential outcomes. We know that testing these assumptions is difficult. Partly, experimental methods are popular because of their potential for constructing clear-cut counterfactuals. Now, the issue of generalizability of results. Now, the best way of isolating the causal effect of interest is problem-specific. Now, consider a response function. So Y is an outcome, X is the determinant of interest, and W all other determinants. For example, in a wage effort study, W will include demographics of participants, market institutions, order of moves, whether or not interactions are one-shot, and so on. But the point to note here is that, in general, the level of Y response to X depends on the level of W and X. Many lab experiments provided evidence for certain values of W. An important point is that there may be trade-offs between the tightness of controls and the relevance of the values of the control variables in this kind of general way. Tight control facilitates replicability, one point that Jordi mentioned, but the field offers a large range of variations in W, which may be relevant but hard to implement in the lab, so there may be trade-offs. And at the end of the day, transporting experimental findings, be on the lab or on the field, to new populations or new environments will require a model. So, methodological debates and their decline. A good thing of modern economics is, in my view, the increasing emphasis in substantive findings relative to methodology. And the opportunities for complementarities between methodologies are now pretty well understood. But realizing those opportunities requires less segmentation by research style, and in some cases retraining. We need to, as professional researchers, increasingly think more and more about retraining during our careers. You know, the years where you could expect to do a productive research career on the basis of your PhD training are long gone, which in a way is good. It's more exciting times for economics and social science generally. So let me mention quickly some of these debates that have been with us for years. One debate is between experimental and non-experimental evaluation of treatment effects. This debate was very prominent in the late 1980s. It was sparked by Bob Lalonde's critique of observational evaluations, especially in labor economics. Not only in economics, also in other areas, non-experimental evaluations have had an impact. Think of Rubin matching methods. I mean, the intent there is to make non-experimental data look like experimental data. This was put forcefully to the test in the context of the evaluation of health effects of smoking. And there are notable examples that combine experimental data with theory and or econometric methods. I've mentioned a few here, but I won't go into this. Another debate, the role of theory, structural versus non-structural approaches. I was going to write a slide, but I just thought I could give you a quote. The current state of play in public finance and labor, according to David Card. When I started, most projects could have a pretty explicit theoretical front end, and sometimes the best ones could then map that directly into the empirical approach. Then in the 1980s, it became less and less important to have this well-worked-out theoretical framework. In some cases, people were focusing on extremely straightforward questions with much more emphasis on how carefully identify were the empirical results. But in the last 10 years, there has been a backlash. And for almost all my PhD students, I really emphasize the importance of having a well-posed theoretical model. You know, at the end of the day, the questions we are really interested come back. You know, we are reminded that we have not answered the questions we were interested in the first place. So, yeah, I think we have learned a lot from the treatment effects revolution, but questions are still there. And we are taking stock and going back to them. That's, I think, the reason why I felt identified myself with that quote. Lab versus field experiments versus randomized control trials. The lab, this is repeating things that have been said, provide tight control variation, offering opportunities to control decision environments in ways that are hard to replicate in the field. They are low cost, and they allow exogenous changes in institutions, so they become important in market design, exchanges, regulations, the whole lot. Lab-like field. Lab-like field experiments, they differ from lab experiments in that they are conducted with non-student subjects. In these experiments, subjects are recruited in the field, field goods are used, and field context as well, all motivated by a search for greater relevance for predicting field behavior, but possibly at the expense of less tight control. And surely, as Jordi reminded us, less replicability. Love-like field and randomized control trials, another debate maybe. My point here is that these debates are the decline relative to substantive results. But see, love-like field experiments differ from randomized control trials in that subjects make decisions that are not necessarily part of their day-to-day decision-making. And they know that they are part of an experiment, or maybe both. The point I want to make here, and has been made many times, is that there may be a strong complementarity between these two, in that love-like data help understand mechanisms through which RCT treatment effects operate. An example, suppose an intervention is conducted in which different types of technologies are randomly offered to farmers and then take-up studied. Risk and time preferences elicited through lab-like experiments can be used to test whether take-up varies with these aspects, right? So in an RCT, the design is not intended usually to distinguish among factors that impinge on the causal effect. But the emphasis is in that the design is directly linked to actual policies, so that in the end we get what we could call reduced form causal treatment effect, which is of policy relevance in itself. But if we want to go into mechanisms, then there is this complementarity. Okay, so why we have all these debates? Obviously, there is purely scientific aspects to this debate, but there is also what we could term the political economy of researcher behavior. Researchers compete among themselves for funding. Most of the funding for research comes from public sources. 1 minute. Okay. So I will not tell you about the political economy of
we want to know
of research behavior. But let me advertise these papers, Shorheide and Wolpin. They provide a formal rationale in the context of work that combines randomized controlled trials and structural estimation. A very interesting read. So another point that I don't have the time to elaborate in detail, but I think it matters. Experiments as a data production technology for systematic use. See, one of the main purposes of experiments is to measure individual characteristics that are hard to measure in other ways. And often we think of experiments in isolation. But we could, we could think of experiments as a build-up of a capital of information, of data, and use this data in a systematic approach. There are some good examples of this, but probably not enough. Experiments on expectations and subjective expectations in macro. This relates to what Ramon was talking about. These studies that Ramon described, they are interested in understanding how agents form expectations. There is an alternative, very complementary approach based on getting empirical survey data on agent expectations. This was an area that Charles Mansky pioneered. And there has been progress, a lot of progress in this context, constructing probabilistic subjective expectations. And we have evidence that this activity provides useful information that makes sense. I will skip the detail there. The particular aspect that I wanted to describe here, because connects with experimental economics, is actually using experiments within surveys to learn about survey measures of expectations, right? And again, just flagging the thing, there is a group of economists at the New York Fed that is doing very interesting work in constructing subjective expectations about inflation and connecting those expectations with monetary policy analysis and analyzing, the nature of those expectations data in relation to outcomes and choices. And that's some detail there. Other experiments within surveys. This connects with what Rosemarie was saying. Technology is very important here. There are lots and lots of interesting new developments thanks to internet technologies for doing experiments within surveys and experiments in the public administration. We ought to start thinking about experimenting with the activity of the administration. The Nordic countries have done some interesting experiments that have been analyzed. And finally, just to conclude with this, I wanted to say a couple of words about ethics in economics. See, learned societies like the Econometric Society, the American Economic Association have discussed the issue of ethical standards for papers that involve experiments on human subjects. In the US, the ground is pretty well organized. Institutions are required to have a so-called institutional review board on human participants. This is an IRB. This is a committee that has been formally designated to approve, monitor, and review biomedical and behavioral research involving humans. Now, the Econometric Society discussed how to deal with experimental papers that come from institutions outside the US that do not require an IRB procedure, in the case of Econometrica. It has been agreed to take the IRB standard as the norm, but implementation is not easy. At the European Economic Association was set up a committee last year to report on practices among economists in Europe in several dimensions: data collection, data management, ethical issues for randomized controlled trials, ethics for lab experiment. This has not to do, with the purity of the research aspects. This has to do, with the profession not wanting to sponsor activity, regardless of how useful from a purely research point of view is, that has ethical problems. And there is also been some discussion of this in the context of randomized controlled trials, but there is a lot more to do there. This is something new for us economists relative to the natural sciences, and we need to start thinking about this seriously. Thank you.